Hello, everyone. Welcome back to, well, not welcome back, welcome to Why Not, a podcast. I'm Thomas Marshall,
I'm Caleb Todd.
and this is a podcast that we're starting. Caleb, how do we even come to this podcast? How did this idea even come about?
Well, I think that you've tried to start podcasts with the entire population of South Carolina, and then
I think that's a fair point.
yeah, and then somewhere along the way, you actually settled on an idea for one and decided that I was just the perfect subject with all my
This is,
charisma and charm.
I think you've got plenty of charisma and charm. I remember it started as a joke because, well, we met through obviously Clemson University. That's where we both graduated from. And it started as a joke because I remember March of 2018, we tried to film one on my phone in my dorm room of Douthit Hills, and it didn't go well.
As
To say
most
the
things
least.
in Douthit Hills don't go well.
I think yeah. I don't think many things do go well for that building. But no, we did an episode back in March, and I think the concept was there, and I think I liked it, and so I remember I was walking because I live in Houston now, and I was just walking campus, and I took a listen to it, and I said, "This has potential, and I think we should really try to explore it." And ever since then, I think it was a great idea, and we're able to now come to this. Why not?
Yeah, so a lot of what this podcast is going to be is just kind of us trying to understand a lot of the issues better on our own. A lot of like us just trying to talk through the issues and trying to come up with solutions that like our generation can get behind.
Yeah, I
You agree
think
with that?
yeah, no, I think Gen Z and the millennial generation has a huge charge in politics right now, and not just politics because I don't want to make it seem like we're just talking political pundit stuff all day, but actual issues that people care about, that people's lives are on the line, if we're being completely honest. And so there's just a new charge, I think, from this past election cycle and into local matters that people are really cared about. And so I think this is kind of a spark from that. And I'm really excited, honestly, to talk about it, to one day have on guests, and to really dive into some deep, complex, nuanced issues that can be broken down, I think, a lot easier.
Yeah, so this is just going to kind of be a constantly evolving thing. We've got our format set now. Every week, one of us is going to be kind of presenting almost on the issue to the other person while they're asking questions and trying to better understand it. And that'll kind of go back and forth throughout the entire course of this thing until we get tired of that, I guess.
Until we just stop immediately. No, but, I think Caleb said that great, and like it, we just give a general disclaimer. We don't claim to know everything about anything. All the issues that we talk about, we're doing research on and grabbing articles and getting stuff from different publications and things like that. And we also aren't meaning to speak on behalf of any one entire group based on race, class, gender, ethnicity, anything like that. Whether that be, whether we make a claim about all liberals do this or all Republicans do this, that's not necessarily the entire general consensus, but we just want to give that disclaimer because we don't know everything. We're just two idiots that really care about the issues. And so I think that's a good tagline that we
Just,
can use.
why not a
But
podcast where two idiots really care about the issues?
we're two idiots that care about the issue. I like it. I think that's a good idea. But today I'm going to be presenting to Caleb, and we're going to be talking about the 2020 election cycle. And a few parts I'm going to define the election. I'm then going to talk about what happened nationally in this past November. I'm then going to speak about what happened in South Carolina specifically, and then we will talk about the whole reason this podcast is born is how can we advocate in a state like South Carolina where I'm from, but Caleb is not from. But how long have you been in South Carolina?
Well, most of my life. I moved here whenever I
Yeah,
was like 6. I'm
right.
21 now, so 15 years.
Yeah, so we're both like I'd call us South Carolina people that have been here for a while. So we really care about the state, and so we really want to dive into that. And so now we're going to talk about this 2020 election. So in one word, can you describe Caleb the 2020 election?
Disappointing.
Disappointing.
That's probably the
I
word that,
agree.
right?
Yeah, I think most people would say that. I agree. I think we're going to talk about that later to figure out why it was disappointing. First, I think I just want to define like every 4 years there's a presidential election, as many people know. Every 2 years, there's the midterm elections that vote on your U.S. House of Representatives. There's Senate races that happen every 6 years, and then gubernatorial races that happen every 4 years. depending on the states. And so an election should be this democratic process that is easy, that you just go and vote and you're able to vote. And that's a part of your, kind of civic duty. And I think we kind of brand voting and the election really interesting. We have a day off. I also find it weird that it's a random Tuesday in November, and I think that deters
Why
some
do you
people
think
from
that that
voting.
happens?
I don't know. I think that's by design. I would like to say that no one likes to get up on a cold Tuesday, November morning to have to go vote, but it's nearing
What do
the
you
end
mean?
of the
That's my
year,
favorite
nearing
thing
the
to
end.
do, Thomas. Just go, just wake up early on a Tuesday whenever I'm supposed to have it. Be on my
Exactly.
fall break.
And having to go to a precinct that they change 5 times within the middle of the day and having to run around. That's real fun. But no, I think on the base level, what I'm trying to evoke is, democracy in a perfect world should be, this equal access to all people that are able to vote, that are able to see the change that they actually want to see. And I think in America that's not necessarily the case, and that's why I said it should be like that. But due to so a myriad of different issues that we'll talk about over the course of this podcast, there's a reason why everyone was talking about this election. Democracy was at stake, and I think.
And
What do you think that means, Caleb?
I don't know. It was used by both sides too.
Yeah,
So I think really part of like the democracy at stake issue is like on one side Trump showed really authoritarian tendencies, right?
right.
It really seemed like he was willing to overrule the entire system, and kind of destroy it. And even though the American system isn't really particularly democratic, been becoming more and more so over the course of our history, right? And Trump
Yeah,
threatened to upend all of that, especially if he was vindicated with a second term. Whereas on the other side, there's this like idea of socialism taking over, and the right voters are typically a little bit older, so that invokes like the Cold War for them, that invokes the USSR. So it was really on both sides. It was just like somewhat a fear tactic, somewhat a little could be a little bit of truth.
yeah. No, I would agree. I think especially on the left side, people really were rising up and saying like this is like democracy. That's it. Like you have to vote in this election, and it drew to a younger crowd of people as well. Just some background in the 2016 election, the most recent one, Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes to 232 to Hillary Clinton, but lost the popular vote by over 3 million, which is again another problem in itself, but another issue that we will tackle later on.
Yeah.
And I
So
really want to speak about. Go ahead.
so what causes that discrepancy, Thomas? Like that specifically. How are we able to have 3 million votes lost in the popular vote, but
The,
still win the electoral college?
the electoral college. I mean, I am just I think constantly frustrated that we live in a system that is, I think, not equitable
Mm.
towards just counting all the votes. And I think that would make the most sense. And I think based on history, you would see a better outcome, maybe that I would like. And then the history of it as well. I don't want to, butcher the history, but I know it's based on slavery and the amount of slaves that people had in their certain states and things like that. So it's also a really nasty history that
Right.
doesn't get talked about enough, and I find that frustrating.
Yeah. And then what about Trump allowed for this to happen? You know, what was it about this guy who was a real estate mogul who was able to appeal to like a populist base?
I think that's what people talked about. And I was gonna speak about just this rise of Trumpism because I found a really great article that I think describes what it is. And in the most beautiful way, it says Trumpism is the political movement based around the president's code of personality. It's a loose set of ideas, so it's not even it's just a loose random set of ideas that can't even be quite called an ideology because it's so incoherent. And for some reason, centering around anti-immigration, anti-Semitic rhetoric, calling it America first, getting back to this notion of America needs to be great again, and just like a rejection of any social progress is what Trumpism was,
Right.
and people bought into it. Any person that I think gets white supremacists excited to vote, you should not be you should not be supporting it. Have want nothing to do with.
Right. What do you mean? The white supremacists would think that they should be able to support them.
What'd you say? Wait, what'd you say?
I said white supremacists should probably think that they should be able to support a white
Ex-
supremacist.
Exactly.
Come on, man.
That's what they think. And if you're on the same side as someone like that, it's like, okay, you need to kind of check yourself at that point. But no, I think the rise of Trumpism was just super interesting to see, and I had never really seen anything like it. Growing up, I hadn't been in too many elections, but I think it was just really interesting to see what this election was kind of brewing to. And people cover Trump's tweets. Political pundits spend days trying to dissect what he said, and people said, quote, this was the most important election in the history of our country, and that democracy was on the line. And so to give us an overview of what this election was, in one word, very important. Even though that's two words, it was a super important election. And now transitioning into nationally. So to transition, what happened nationally? I think we've talked about this election for so long, and everyone came out to vote. It was the biggest vote turnout in history. And the 2020 election results, I think obviously many people know what's already happened. We are in 2021 already, so we're about to have the inauguration pretty soon, and that's going to happen. So I just want to talk about we knew this election was going to be like no other. The mail-in voting, the absentee ballots that had to be counted. It was not until I was cleaning my room on a Saturday morning, just doing some regular cleaning as I do. And
Do you clean though, Thomas?
I do clean. I'd like to say.
That. I don't believe that. Anyone who knows Thomas knows that he does not seem like the type of person who would clean.
And that's fair, because I've recently become more type A, but we'll get into that. I don't know, maybe another time. I'm trying to be, because Caleb is the dad of our orientation friend group, I believe, and he's the one that keeps everyone in line. Oh, but no, so I was doing some cleaning that Saturday, and I got a call from my dad, because we were talking about it the whole week. I think I got a FaceTime. I might have got a FaceTime from Jacob Krotz, who is another friend of the show. And he was like, it's over. Like, Biden did it. Like, Georgia's been counted. I mean, it might have been Georgia, I think, was officially counted, or whatever the state was.
Or Pennsylvania.
He was like, Pennsylvania might have been. And he was like, it's over. Like, it actually happened. And so, for me, I'll explain what the rush of emotion that goes through my head is. First off, of course, I'm excited. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm not excited that we don't have another 4 years of Trump. But also, I know that I'm not super excited, because I know that's not the person I necessarily wanted to be president, and that's not the America I necessarily see. But I do understand, in order for some progress to be made, I am obviously glad that it is Biden over Trump. But just being a more kind of progressive person, and I think about Black folks, and I think about, okay, what's actually going to happen for Black folks, and are we just going to keep voting for the Democratic Party every year? Like, what change are we going to see after an entire year of racial reckoning and civil unrest? So it's a very kind of jaded feeling, but I was, of course, happy, and I think we all need to celebrate that day. What about you?
Yeah. So I remember I was obsessively watching CNN, and I don't watch CNN. I don't watch any kind of like cable news program. But I was obsessively watching as like the days wore on, and I listened to a podcast called Pod Save America. You might have heard of it.
Yes, friends of the show, we like to call them. Maybe one day.
No, probably not.
Probably not.
But like, and they had said, don't do this. Don't do this. It's gonna drag out because of the mail-in voting and because of just how different this year was with the pandemic. But I was still obsessively watching. Like, I got so tired of listening to Wolf Blitzer and Anderson Cooper. Like, it was insane. But I just kept watching because it was just like my nerves were so high. And then whenever it was called, there was some relief. But I realized that tension that I had been feeling watching for the like past 4 or 5 days or whatever it had been was just like, it was still there,
Right.
Because I knew that there was probably going to be something that happened afterwards, right? Whether, we saw it with Trump eventually, trying to overturn the election, even though it was democratically and rightfully won in the electoral college.
Yeah, no, I think there was I get this email every week, and it's two girls that do a really great job of unlearning racism. And they talked about step by step for what happens if there is a coup. like what actually happens if that happens.
Hmm.
And for a second, the country that I grew up in my entire life, I thought we may be going to a really bad place. We're already, I would say, in a bad place. Maybe that's just the cynic in me,
Hmm.
but I was really nervous about things could be bad. And
Hmm.
we saw this summer with protests that happened, and you see the shots of them boarding up Washington D.C. and Philadelphia and other really big major cities for if something happened because on one hand, you may have Proud Boys
Hmm.
coming out, or whatever kind of dumb thing that is,
Right.
coming out and being, vilified to say we need to step up. And I was just, I
Yeah.
think I was nervous for a second.
Yeah, I think it was just tension, and it's like this tension we've been feeling probably since Trump like started running, right? Like
Right.
we feel it either like in I feel it in like my family, and sometimes you feel it like just walking around the streets because some people aren't wearing masks and some people are. But when the election was finishing up, that tension was just like palpable,
I
and
think
I
it was
think
everything just leading up to it.
and instead of resolving like tension normally would, it just kind of felt like it like stretched a little bit more at the end, and
Right.
like that's not what you want to feel after an election.
Yeah. And even a quick sidebar, I think this tension is not ending, of course, at all.
No.
We see, I think I've heard this by every pundit, we're a divided nation, quote unquote. And yeah, I think we are. I think we've always have been to a certain extent. I think we're just really starting to see the real ugly parts that privileged people have not spent time to really see.
Hmm.
Um, but I really think that's the part when the fact that Joe Biden has to market himself as the president elect
Hmm.
and like has to make all these Twitter videos and do all these press conferences. Like I've never remembered a president, a transitioning president having to do that.
Yeah,
Like the fact
it's
that he has to set up camp in Delaware and do all this stuff, I think that's wild.
yeah, it's a different year. Um, yeah, and
It is.
that kind of goes all the way down the ballot. Um, it just everything about this year felt a little off.
Yeah, it
Part
did.
of that might have been polling.
Yeah,
For
which
the
is
second straight general, like the polling seemed wrong because we thought the
yeah,
Senate was going to turn blue, and it might still, but um,
yeah, which
we'll
we will get
see.
into.
We'll see on
Um,
January 6th.
we will. No, I think that's a crapshoot. I think polling's a crapshoot. We can have another podcast to talk all about polling. But no, I think some points to hit on. So when Biden wins on Saturday, people are really excited, flood the streets. You also have this overlooming mail-in situation, which everyone was really getting up in arms about. I saw a lot of people on the right saying, "I don't know about mail-in ballots and things like that. I don't trust them. They're not fake. Like, where did all these millions of votes come from? They're coming from dead people," which is some of the dumbest things I've ever heard.
Right.
If I'm going to be completely honest, there have been decades of mail-in voting.
Hmm.
Like Washington State is a mail has done like I believe 90% mail-in voting
Hmm.
from this article that I've pulled up. And so there are plenty of states that are doing mail-in voting that have done it
Hmm.
for a while. I
Right.
think it just needs to start to become the norm, but for some
Hmm.
reason, it hasn't. And
Yeah.
so now, to talk about how things fared nationally, of course, you got your U.S. House of Representatives, and then you've got the Senate, 435 members in the House of Reps, and then the Senate, every state has two members. And so there was a decline from that blue wave that everyone raved on about in 2018
Hmm.
on the House side, where the Democrats won 235 to 199, and there's only 218 needed for control. And you had some really close races in some pretty conservative, districts. We saw it here in South Carolina, Joe Cunningham winning
Right.
SC1, which was the last time we've seen that happen. We saw it in many other places. Like, that was the rise of AOC and the squad. That was a huge just shift, I think, politically,
Right.
that people start to see a lot of just younger generation pouring out to come and vote.
Hmm. And then in
And
2020, it seemed to disappear a little bit.
it did. And that was definitely I think a disappointment for sure.
Yeah.
We saw something completely different from 235 down to 222
Hmm.
for the Democratic Party and the Republicans for 210, and with the um, with Biden taking Cedric Richmond and some other folks from the House as well, it's starting to dwindle down as well. So
Right.
it's really looking like a place of where do we go from here, and it turned into a big, I think, battle of how did the Democrats lose? And I think some people are trying to blame it on political branding, or we weren't like moderate enough. And I personally disagree with that notion. I don't think
Right.
that's the case. But I guess, what do you think about that kind of decline that happened?
I don't know, because it doesn't make much sense in my head, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
One, because like the polling was so strong for so long, but also two, because there was record voter turnout, right? And Biden won by so much. You would expect that to carry over into the House races a little bit. You would expect the down ballot pressure from the presidential race to work a little bit better. But I will say I think a lot of this is gerrymandering.
For sure.
We have an episode on in February. It's just yeah. I think it's my first word, disappointing. I wasn't disappointed with the presidential race. I was disappointed with the House and the Senate.
Right. And just to give people a quick education lesson, I guess I'll call it, on gerrymandering, which we'll get into much later in that episode. It's basically when people are able to write districts for themselves and able to, because every congressional race has a district tied to it, and so to be able to win that district, they put everyone in certain places, and they make sure that whoever the incumbent is, whoever the recent winner is, they're going to make sure that they try to win again. And so it's really messed up. There's a lot of money poured into it, and I've read that the Republicans and Democrats have like committees on redistricting and are really spending a lot of time. And every 10 years, when the census comes out, that is when the redistricting talks happen. And so entire maps are going to look different. Some might stay the same, depending on how they draw the districts. But
Right.
it is just, I think, super frustrating in South Carolina, where I'm looking at the map now. SC4, which is William Timmons district, super small, a part of the upstate South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
But then Clyburn's district, they've gerrymandered my county of Richland County.
Okay, they've gerrymandered your district of Richland County.
Yeah, no, it's must have they've gerrymandered the parts of like Kingstree, Orangeburg, all really a big population where the black people live in South Carolina, and have made it into the one blue county that Jim Clyburn has had the seat for over 20 years, and they know that I think primarily a person of color will keep that seat,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not right that they've put every single black person in South Carolina
Right.
basically into one district.
I think gerrymandering is the
that-
big issue we've got. One of the big issues with democracy we've got going forward.
It is, and it's a bigger conversation. So the flip sides to the Senate races in Georgia, that is where the Senate races are going to determine what happens. So we've seen all the other Senate races finish up and they are done, but all eyes have gone to Georgia, and I don't think Georgia has been this popular since maybe the Atlanta Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And the Atlanta Olympics was like in 1998, I think, when I was born. So I don't know why I made that reference.
You're
But I think
a
that's-
big Atlanta Olympics guy.
Big Atlanta.
Tell me one athlete who was in the Atlanta Olympics, and
Could
we can
not even tell you. Could not. I just remember my dad talking about it,
Mhm.
and he was telling me how he should have went to some of the different games, because Atlanta's almost 3 hours from Columbia at
Yeah,
least.
about.
And so yeah, he goes on about that all the time, but he didn't make it, unfortunately. Sorry, Dad. But the Georgia races we're going to determine if the Senate is going to be tied, and that deciding vote then would go to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris,
Mhm.
and she would then have the blue majority. So a really big year if Joe Biden wants to pass any legislation that he wants to get through. It's going to have to come through Georgia.
Yeah.
And so you've got John Ossoff versus the incumbent David Perdue, and then in a new Senate race you have Reverend Raphael Warnock and then Kelly Loeffler. And I've seen the debates. I have seen John Ossoff on TikTok.
He's a big TikToker.
He is going like huge. Like, people loved him on that app.
Yeah.
And I did not know he was going to get that much love, but I think it also shows that politics is changing. And so,
Right.
what are your thoughts on the Georgia races?
I have no idea. I have no
Yeah,
faith.
so
I have no
I-
faith in any of our institutions anymore, so I'm not quite sure. And the fact that
I'm-
they create things like runoffs to disproportionately disadvantage Dems,
Right.
specifically people of color,
Exactly.
So it's just kind of I don't know. A lot of this podcast is just going to try to be me restoring my faith in humanity.
It's hard.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think anything could happen, but I'm not gonna bet.
I agree.
I'm not a betting guy. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna be.
Not
I'm
gonna
not gonna be
gamble.
betting one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also am like, I've gotten to this point where so much of the work that I do is fueled by anger, and I
Hmm.
hate that it's like that. But it's also the truth. Like I'm constantly angry at every institution that America has founded. Constantly angry how marginalized communities are disenfranchised all
Hmm.
the time within every single thing.
Right.
And so I'm constantly. I also don't have a lot of faith, but of course I would like to see it go one way, so there can be some hopefully progressive policies passed on the federal side. But then again, we just have to see what happens.
Right.
Republicans are traditionally known for getting up that day in voting,
Hmm.
and Dems are always going to do early voting and absentee. So hopefully, there's enough early votes and absentee to hold us over. But I don't know. It's going to be
Right.
tough. Yeah. So now transitioning to the third part of this, what happened in South Carolina for the results?
Well,
So
Thomas, may I ask you a question?
yes,
What happened in South Carolina?
what happened? Thank you for that.
No
I really
problem.
appreciate that question. I would love to tell you what happened in South Carolina.
Really, I
So
didn't think that was the whole point of this podcast.
I didn't think that was. I didn't think we were going to talk about that at all. But no. So South Carolina, I think everyone's eyes were on the U.S. Senate race between Jamie Harrison and our. I'm not even. I was gonna call my favorite, but that's not even a funny joke at this point.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham,
Yeah.
and it was a
Everyone's
huge
favorite puppet.
race.
Everyone's favorite puppet.
Everyone's favorite puppet, yes. Remember when Lindsey Graham used to hate Trump, and then now he goes golfing with him every Saturday?
Mm-hmm.
Can't confirm or deny if that's true, but probably sounds like he does. But no, I was really disappointed. Jamie Harrison loses.
Yeah.
Of course, that was someone I thought was going to be great. Right from Orangeburg, went to Yale. You know, a product of what South Carolina looks like, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And obviously, for me to see a black male in that role, I thought was going to be great. Of
Right.
course, I don't agree on every single thing that he advocates for, but it
Right.
obviously would have been a huge shift um, in South Carolina.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Jamie Harrison lost. I also it was 54 to 42.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to bring in there was a lot of money spent on that race,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a lot of money.
Well, Jamie Harrison it was the most fundraising ever for a Senate candidate, if
Ever.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was. It was until John Ossoff just broke it like
Oh,
two
did he?
days ago. Yeah, literally just 2 days. In the research for this episode, he just broke it. So, but yeah, for a time being, he poured over 100 million. And I did some phone banking for Harrison, and what I noticed a lot in the campaign was there were a lot of outside donors, I believe, that really from like California, and people just hate Lindsey Graham nationally, and so everyone wanted to make sure that they pour into this campaign so he doesn't win. And so I think there were a lot of grassroots efforts in South Carolina, but I also think there were a lot of national outlook that maybe didn't translate over to votes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I just think I think a lot of things, despite the fact that like this race had the national attention, and I think the same with like Cunningham. You know, that was Cunningham's seat, the representative from SC1, who happens to be my representative.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah. Like Cunningham was known as like the top target for the
He was.
Republican, whereas Jamie Harrison was known as like everyone hates Lindsey Graham. Like this is like something we could win. And I think it was just a case of like national perceptions didn't fit the South Carolina political ecosystem, right?
Right. And that's what I think people who don't live here don't realize that
Mm-hmm.
of course we want the state to go blue, and that's going to take a long time before it does, because of course I want to look glass half full, but I also have to be just real, and that it's going to take a little bit. Like right now, what we saw in this past election in South Carolina, we saw what a lot of pundits are calling a red wave.
Mm-hmm.
You saw Cunningham lose that one term, and like you said, the National Republican Congressional Committee poured in tons of money into Nancy Mace's campaign to make sure that she would win, and Cunningham was vulnerable because he just flipped that seat,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was something that was brand new,
Yeah.
and we're gonna see how Nancy Mace does, and I think it'll be interesting to watch. And
Yeah.
now there's even a domain registered per Twitter. You can never believe what Twitter says all the time, but sometimes Twitter's got some good stuff.
Mhm.
Apparently, there is a domain registered Cunningham for governor, which in 2022 we will have the run for governor here in South Carolina, Henry McMaster versus someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be interesting. Any picks for early predictions?
I think he's gonna run. I mean,
I think
I
so.
told you that like a couple months ago, where like as soon
Yeah,
as the election was done, I was like, I think he's going to run for governor because it makes
yeah,
sense.
I,
But
yeah. I know it does. Like it's a easy transition.
will he win? I don't know. I think maybe that'll be a lot of what we're working on, trying to get a fucking governor elected in South Carolina that's not Henry McMaster.
That's
Um,
not Harriet Master who gives tons of money to private schools,
yeah, love that.
which we
Um,
love that so much.
yeah. So what you described what happened in South Carolina as a red wave. How did that affect like our local races, like in the Senate and the House in South Carolina?
Yeah, so in the Senate and the House, primarily, of course, the strongholds are both Republican leadership. We have the majority in the South Carolina Senate and on the House of Rep side as well.
Hmm.
So, because this year is so important that we talked about earlier, it's a redistricting year.
Hmm.
Apparently, redistricting now does not have to be reviewed by the federal government. Part of
Nope.
the Voting Rights Act was stricken down. So, you can gerrymander the heck out of any district, and that is scary. That
Yeah.
is not good when Republicans have the leadership and have the possibility to do that because they will, and they will write smaller districts and literally make sure that people don't win. And
Hmm.
one scary article I found, and I call it scary because I think it's a great word for it. It's how you build the infrastructure of politics.
Hmm.
Is they gerrymandered then State Senator Obama's district to go out. They literally wrote it where they knew where he lived. They wrote it outside of his house so that he would have to literally sell his house and move into a district to be able
Hmm.
to represent that district. That
Right.
is insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely insane.
Yeah. There needs to be more regulation on this, or just like
Yeah.
independent committees or whatever. But yeah, that's oh, depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not great. And so like
Yeah.
I think people really need to start talking about redistricting more, and we have to care about this really big issue because it's going to matter. And so
Hmm.
on the state senate side, we had Vincent Shaheen, which he ran for governor back against Nikki Haley and also ran again. And he lost twice unfortunately. And he lost his race. He was a state senator here. He lost his
Hmm.
race very closely. And then on the House side, you had Mandy Powers Norrell, which, if you remember, she ran for lieutenant governor with James Smith just a while back in 2018 and lost as well. And so Republicans gained 2 seats on the House side, I believe, gained one on the Senate side. So
Right.
it was
So
a
we're
tough
stuck.
out to lose seats that
Yeah.
people thought that those were going to be Democratic strongholds.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that's what it looked like for the SC House and the Senate. And I think it's also going to be super interesting. Something we're going to try to keep up with is
Hmm.
a lot of that legislation that goes through. I think they're going to be really focused on, of course, redistricting, coming up with a redistricting committee, as well as COVID-19 pandemic relief. Education reform is also going to be on the line. There's going to be a lot of big hot topic issues that are going to be talked about.
So what does this mean for progressivism in South Carolina, like in the state house?
That is a good question. I think this means, and a part of this podcast is attempting to do that, is organizing is going to be so key and so important. It's so important that we don't just care about what just happened in 2020, that we're actively taking a lens and looking at politics, looking at policies already. Just off of the top of my head, I know I'm looking at a policy that Representative Wendy Brawley
Hmm.
out of Hopkins is working on, and it's an assault weapons ban
Right.
towards to gun violence in South Carolina. Something that's really important to me, a subject I just care a lot about. We live in the state where the Manual 9 shooting happened in Charleston.
Right.
It's a bill that's been filed previously in past legislations,
Hmm.
but I'd love to see it go through and try to see what's going to happen with that. There's also a repeal of the Heritage Act that's possibly going to come to the floor. There's going to be a lot of big legislative things that will happen in the
Right.
midst of a pandemic, and some members want to wear masks and some members don't. So
Hmm.
it's going to be, for progressivism, it's going to be tough in a year where redistricting and pandemic relief are going to be taking precedent.
Right.
But it still could happen. We could still see
Right.
some really landmark stuff.
I do wonder if you think anything's going to happen on the state level with pandemic relief.
I think it will. I think it just depends on what type of relief happens and where it goes. I think higher education is one of those things that always may get kind of the lesser end. And
Hmm.
we know schools come and lobby to the state house every year to try to get more public ed funding. I think there's also just education broadly. Are we
Hmm.
going to continue to fund education publicly the way that I believe it should be,
Mhm.
and not give private school vouchers like Mary McMaster literally wants to do, and we had a whole press conference about it. So it's going to be interesting to see where that relief goes and see
Right.
where the state house believes they are best at. But you got a Republican
Mhm.
stronghold in
Right.
both chambers, so it's going to be tough. I'm not going
Yeah.
to lie. Got to keep it real.
Yeah. Well, was there anything good that came out of this election for South Carolina? Like at all?
I think there, I
Any
think there
silver
was. I
lining?
think, I think there was definitely some first. I definitely want to give some shout outs to Florence, elected its first black mayor, and she's also a woman. Teresa Myers Irvin becomes Florence's first black mayor, first female mayor. So that's always lovely to see.
Yeah.
As well as in Richland County in the coroner race, who I had a chance to interview back in June. Hopefully, we can maybe get on the show one day. Nada Rutherford was the first black person and also first woman in the role to win coroner
Wow.
race, and also the first medical professional to
Mhm.
actually win that role. Where
Mhm.
that's a role where someone goes actively looking into the scene of a when someone dies or anything like that, and kind of determines their fate of death.
Yeah.
And there was literally someone that was a photographer in that role before, and not even
Jesus.
someone that had medical experience, which is insane.
Yeah.
But
Ugh.
that's the world we live in, I guess. I also wanted to highlight really quickly, Jamie Harrison had more votes than President Obama did in 2012 in South
Right.
Carolina.
Yeah.
Over 1 million votes for Harrison,
Mhm.
and Obama didn't even break 900,000, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's insane.
And
Do you think that's like representative of just like more people who have liberal values coming out to vote, or do you think that's representative of like population gain, or do you think that's like voter registration? You know.
I think that's a beautiful question, Caleb. I think it's a little bit of everything. I think
Mhm.
so many times South Carolina Democrats, that may be my one critique of them. I think sometimes they focus too much on let's make sure we appeal to the Republicans in our state. We
Mhm.
need that moderate person who's going to bring people together and do this message of unity,
Right.
which in some ways may work. I don't personally believe it's the way I would believe,
Mhm.
but I think when you look at people and you actually look at the electorate and you see the amount of people that are not registered to vote, and you see
Mhm.
the amount of black and brown folks that are not registered to vote, or who are registered to vote and not voting, you can actually change the tide already, and you already have the electorate. You just have to meet these people where they are and
Mhm.
really get to know who the people are
Right.
and really get people excited to vote.
Yeah.
And not making just a transactional one-time thing,
Mhm.
making it a thing of you vote this once, but then there's more things to do and more organized to do later.
Right.
Is that hard with systemic issues? Yes, which we will talk about in many
What do
episodes
you thought? I thought the
later.
systemic issues made it easier.
Exactly. Who would have thought? Systemic
Well, it makes
issues
it easier
is
on one side.
exactly
Yeah.
America's brand. But I think, I
No,
think, but no, I think that's what America prides itself on, and so South Carolina, I think, in order to really structurally change the trajectory of where people in the state want to go, when you live in a place where we have some of the most highest eviction rates and so many other issues and a sinking climate on the
Mhm.
Charleston shores, we have to do things that are not in the name of just bipartisanship.
Right.
And maybe that's just my opinion, but I think we both believe that we're going to
Yeah.
have to see some big structural changes,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren would say.
Yeah, and I think that's a view, hopefully, that's becoming more and more common both in South Carolina and the country and the world abroad. You know,
Yeah, I agree.
we saw some busts. Wow, that's a word, isn't it?
That's a word. It is.
We saw some busts in the national elections in South Carolina. We saw a couple of surprising losses in the state level, but we did see increasing voter turnout. We saw candidates of color getting elected in the roles that they've never been elected in before. How do we build upon those victories in South Carolina after such like a dominant red victory in the higher level races?
And I think that's the question.
Mhm.
I really think that's kind of tying this all together. What
Mhm.
we want this first episode to look like. How can we advocate in this state
Mhm.
for progressive policies that are actually changing and shifting the guard of what South Carolina is supposed to be?
Mhm.
Basically, how does South Carolina become the new Georgia?
Right.
And I thought that we were closer.
Mhm.
We are not.
No, we're further
I'm
away.
going to
we
I
had a
want
lot
to
of
make that
conversations
claim.
about this before,
Yeah,
and we were hyping ourselves up, man. We were hyping
way
up
too
South
much.
Carolina, and then it was just like earthquake happened, and we were right
Right.
back to square one.
Yeah. It's like that part in womp womp, that kind of noise. Maybe we need to put that in or something, but that's literally
I'm just
that
gonna let you
it,
have the womp womp for yourself. That's gonna be everyone will know that's your thing, Thomas. You'll just have to say it
maybe
every
the womp
podcast.
womp will just take that clip and we'll insert it in just me saying that.
Just
And
over and
that'll
over
be
again,
the
get like a soundboard.
yeah. One day once we graduate up to getting a someone,
Yeah.
that'll be really fun. But no, this is I think every week we'd like to just take this time to brainstorm and think about some new ideas of what does this new South look like. I think we are people that are a part of this younger generation that's looking towards the South and wanting to see a difference and a new change at that regard. And so, how do we do this? I think first off, we have to really understand. I think in order to talk to people, and I'd like to believe rural voters
Hmm.
on both sides of the aisle necessarily don't love either option when they vote every 4 years.
Right.
But noticing that it's not just every 4 years, it's what local elections look like and get people to really care about things. And the
Hmm.
thing is, people already do.
Right.
It's just really hard to try to dedicate time to civic engagement when you have a 9 to 5 job, you have kids, you got so many other things going on.
Yeah.
But that understanding piece, I think, is a really first good part into it.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
so I think that's the way to do it. There's a couple of people I'd like to shout out that's kind of already doing some similar work is the South Carolina Progressive Action Network has been working on registering voters since 2004.
Right.
Follow their Twitter at SCProNet. They've got some really good resources and guides to be able to talk about justice and democracy, and they've even got a really cool gerrymandering fight against gerrymandering
Right.
project that they're working on called Fair Maps, and they were doing some really cool stuff over there. So definitely give them a follow, as well as on Instagram. Follow Circle of SC. I definitely love to call them friends of the show.
Hmm.
Lauren Harper, Amelia, and Larry, people that I know that are really, really great. Powerful Black women working in South Carolina that do a weekly political newsletter that's targeted at Gen Z millennial voters. And they had a great poll that I wanted to even reference that Gen Z and millennial voters in South Carolina, their biggest issues that they care about are civil and human rights, education, healthcare, and the climate. And those are all things we'll be talking about.
Yeah, and those seem like the just Gen Z across the board, man. That's like the entire country. That's what the whole.
Yeah,
That's what the progressive, like what the progressive movement's made out of.
yeah, I agree. And so, what is how do we advocate, Caleb? Like, what does this look like? We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Hmm.
Vaccines are coming out, but we're still going to be in this thing for I'd say the rest of 2021.
Hmm.
How are we able to really get people excited about this and get people to care about issues just not every 4 years?
Right. Yeah. So, for anyone who doesn't know, my background in activism at all is just kind of in environmental activism. It's in working to create events and create programming for environmental issues or against environmental issues, but for environmental
Yes.
solutions. Um, and the thing that I've really come away with over the course of my 4 years of doing this really is you need to meet people at their level, right? You need to have like conversations with people, understand what either misunderstandings or what like things that they don't like about different policies, because if you don't understand that, then you're just going to be hitting the wrong ball, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you can understand that, you take one step further into developing a coalition that could succeed, right? So I think that
Right.
a lot of what we're going to have to be doing, especially over this first year in the Biden administration, and as we gear up for like 2022, is just like having those conversations so that we can more effectively build coalitions and market towards different people. If that makes sense to you,
Yeah. No,
Tommy.
I agree. I think a part of what you said is kind of that marketing towards different people.
Hmm.
How do you take like of course this is hard and like maybe I don't want to be the person to have these conversations because I don't think that's my life's work. If I'm
Hmm.
being completely honest, I don't want to spend time necessarily trying to convince Trump supporters that like
Right.
my life matters or things like that. But like, how do you deconstruct a say defund the police
Right.
to a back the blue person and how they feel about
Hmm.
something? how do you deconstruct that message to say, here's what this actually does. Here's how this will be better for you and for your community and for other people around you.
Right.
Here are these systemic issues that are pervasive and within our state that affect your quote unquote like one black friend or you know,
Right.
something like that. You know, how do you deconstruct that message? I think it's going to be super important.
Right. And like, I don't think this podcast is going to necessarily be in the spirit of bipartisanship. I think you've said that already in this episode. But I think it is important to understand that everyone hits a common ground somewhere. There's always going to be something someone agrees with you on. And understanding that is the way to like make any sort of progress with someone who is so strung up in their beliefs or like is following a cult of personality. Right. So
No, it is. It's interesting. We live in South Carolina. We've got a huge faith community that also dives into politics, which I'd love to do an episode about, and just so many different issues and bubbles that people care about. You know, we have football, which is basically a religion, which is a whole nother thing we could get into.
Yeah.
The South's politics just looks so different, and I think the way we go at this will look a little bit different than how people in California and New York are able to really make progressive change, but it can still be done, and that's where I'm going to hang my hat. Well, I think that's all the questions, Caleb.
Yeah. Well, what a great first episode, Thomas. I'm so
I'd
proud.
like to say it was. I'd like to say it was great. Call us out if we made any dumb claims or bad hot takes.
I don't know.
Definitely
There
let
weren't
us
any
know.
like crazy hot takes in this one. I don't think.
There weren't
Green New
crazy
Deal
hot
one will
takes.
probably be a little worse.
The Green New Deal one will be definitely, I think, worse. We might have some things to say about it. But no, we want this to be a community of people. That's the whole reason we're starting this. We really want it to be this collective action that we're really trying to speak about. And so we're really excited for it. And Caleb, is there anything else for us?
No, just give us 5 stars. We're gonna advocate for ourselves here.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Self-advocacy is important.
Yeah. Whatever you're listening on, just give us a good review if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, send us an email. Let us know what's going on. Like, let us know where we can improve. All the links to every organization that Thomas talked about in this podcast will be in our show notes, and we hope that you all keep listening.
Yeah. Bye.
Why Not a Podcast? It's created and written by Thomas Marshall and Caleb Todd. Intro and outro music written and performed by Kevin McLeod. Consider making a donation to him through Creative Commons.